I cannot be silent.
Back when Eisenhower was the president, golf courses is where most of his time was spent. So I never really listened to what the president said, because in general I believed that the general was politically dead. But he always seemed to know when the muscles were about to be flexed, because I remember him saying something, mumbling something about a military-industrial complex.
As I have walked among the desperate, rejected, and angry young men, I have told them that Molotov cocktails and rifles would not solve their problems. I have tried to offer them my deepest compassion while maintaining my conviction that social change comes most meaningfully through nonviolent action. But they ask, and rightly so, what about Vietnam? They ask if our home nation wasn't using massive doses of violence to solve its problem, to bring about the changes it wanted. Their questions hit home, and I knew that I could never again raise my voice against the violence of the oppressed in the ghettos without having first spoken clearly to the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, my own government. For the sake of those boys, for the sake of this government, for the sake of the hundreds of thousands trembling under our violence, I cannot be silent.
Each one reach one, each one try.
I cannot be silent.
Nobody can do everything, but everybody can do something. Everyone must play a part. Everyone's got to go to work. Work for peace. Spirit say work.
I cannot be silent.
Empowering the body, mind, and spirit. This is We Cannot Be Silent with Phil Restino and Larry Pinckney.
Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the October 20th, 2014 broadcast of We Cannot Be Silent with Phil Restino and Larry Pinckney. My name is Phil Restino, and I'm one of the co-hosts, and our other co-host, Larry Pinckney, is with us tonight. Tonight we have a very special guest, Dr. Rick Staggenborg, of Soldiers for Peace International. But for those folks who may just be tuning in to our show and don't know about Larry and myself, I would like to give a quick introduction of Larry and I first. Larry and I started this program, this monthly radio show, January 15, 2012, almost 3 years ago, and it was on the actual date of birth for Martin Luther King Jr., and that's where actually we got the title for our program from his Beyond Vietnam speech, which you heard snippets of in our introduction. Myself, I've been an anti-war activist, and got involved with Veterans for Peace back in 2005 when I first learned of them, and they were talking about impeaching the president for war crimes, and that really got my interest. I thought that's something we could do to stop the war, and these guys were really serious about it, and so I joined up and got involved with the anti-war movement, and have been involved with the Central Florida chapter for years. And come around 2011, we had been pushing for impeachment of President Obama for committing the same war crimes that our anti-war groups had cited in the call for impeaching his predecessor, George Bush. And a fellow veteran for peace, Nick Engitz, up there in Indiana, wrote for Intrepid Report, and he knew of this fellow, Larry Pinckney. And Larry was writing 2 weekly columns at the time, one for the Black Commentator, Keeping It Real with Larry Pinckney, as well as his column with Intrepid Report. And Nick turned me on to his article at the time, July 21st, 2011, entitled, "Is It Time to Impeach Obama?" and boy, did he make the case for impeaching Obama and applying the same standard, regardless of party, race, color, any of that. Wrong is wrong and right is right, no matter who's doing it. And so I looked up Larry Pinckney and sought him out, and he quickly signed on to our impeachment resolution, which later passed at the 2011 National Convention, actually, at Veterans for Peace. And we've been friends ever since. In November of 2011, when the Occupy movement was starting up there, it was about a month old, the folks over at UnitedWeStrike.com asked both Larry and I to join their show, Charles Irwin and Karen Tostado, to give our perspective on this new movement, Occupy. And I was invited on as the anti-war activist, and Larry, with his background as a member of the original Black Panther Party and a author and writer and activist for many years. And we just seemed to click during that show, and not long thereafter, United We Strike asked us to come on and have our own show, and that's when we started in January of 2012 with We Cannot Be Silent. As I mentioned, Larry Pinckney is a former Black Panther, was a member of the original Black Panther Party, was an activist his whole life, like many of the original Black Panthers. They were subject to the COINTELPRO operations carried out by the federal government here in the United States, and many went to prison, were shot, killed, what have you. The fact that a group of Americans were gathering together and to defend themselves and do for themselves. Actually, the name of the party was, the original name was the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense. And the government can't have that. The U.S. government cannot have people doing for themselves. So they pretty much neutralized the Black Panther Party, and Larry's number came up. Eventually he was set up and put to prison for 10 years and served as a political prisoner for 10 years in some pretty rough circumstances. And since then, getting out, he's done a lot of writing, a lot of appearances, a lot of activism, and he's been keeping up the struggle, as he says, ever since. And we're happy to have Larry as part of our team. Larry asked me to do the introductions for both of us. And we also, now that you know both of us, we also want to mention JP, who is now the proprietor and chief operator of the Wolf Spirit Radio Network. And he's picked up the torch ever since we lost Dave Corso, the founder of the network, a few months ago. JP has stepped up and really done a great job in keeping the network going and allowing us to still be on air and put on these shows. So I want to give a big thank you to JP and Wolf Spirit Radio for giving us the opportunity to be on air each month. And please visit the website, wolfspiritradio.com, and click around and see all the other programming that's on throughout the week, and take in some of these other shows. Wolf Spirit Radio Network is a independent network, does not have sponsors or corporate sponsors or government funding or anything like that. So we depend solely on the donations of the listeners and people who want to see this independent media keep going along and doing the good job that it does. So please, if you would, when you're on the Wolf Spirit Radio website, wolfspiritradio.com, please search out the donate button and give what you can, so we can keep this independent media going. Well, tonight I'd like to introduce our special guest. As I mentioned, Dr. Rick Staggenborg. And Dr. Rick Staggenborg is a former Army and Veterans Administration psychiatrist who ran for the U.S. Senate in 2010 on a campaign based on a pledge to introduce a constitutional amendment to abolish corporate personhood. Now that the general public is beginning to understand the importance of the issue, he was devoting much of his time to get political activists to understand that the only way to reach their goals is to establish representative democracy in the U.S. It will require a constitutional amendment banning corporate campaign expenditures and limiting amounts of rich individuals can donate to influence elections. Rick was convinced that the only way to do this is to make support for such an amendment a campaign issue, and that's why he wanted to run for Congress to represent we the people who want to serve our interests over those of corporations who currently control the U.S. government. Rick believes that it's possible to end war if we can prove that democracy is possible. Unless we can awaken enough Americans to the fact that their government is pursuing an agenda of corporate imperialism that will enslave them along with the rest of the world, if not reclaimed by we the people, we will leave our children with a legacy of pain for which we cannot be forgiven. Ultimately, endless war is a symptom of a disease that will destroy human civilization if not eradicated. There is no us versus them. Our fates are intertwined. None of us gets out alive. The question is, how will we have lived? And that's from Dr. Rick Staggenborg's bio. And as I mentioned, he's the founder of Soldiers for Peace International, which we're going to learn about tonight. And that website for Soldiers for Peace International is www.soldiersforpeaceinternational.org. Please give it a look. So with that all said, we want to see if Dr. Rick Staggenborg is with us. Rick, are you with us?
I'm here, Phil. Thanks for having me on. Hi, Larry.
Oh, you bet.
Hey, how you doing?
Great, thanks.
Good.
Is that you, Larry?
Yeah, of course.
Oh, great. Great. Larry's with us, and thank you, Rick, for being with us tonight. I did read from your bio for the audience, but I'd like to ask if you would please give us your background and for our listeners, and let us know who Rick Staggenborg is and what he's up to today.
Well, I'm just one of millions of people around the world, I guess, who understands that the path to peace is through justice. Been trying to figure out for myself what it's going to take to end war and by establishing justice. And I'm convinced that it will take the creation of a real democratic government, government of, by, and for the people, which is a far cry from what we have in the United States today, because our government is so powerful that needs to be the focus of a united international front against fascism and war. At the same time, the people in other countries are working on dealing with the corruption of their own government, because ultimately all of these governments that are responsible for creating these wars, all the governments that are complicit in this corporate empire, are controlled by the same small group of individuals through their corporate connections.
Yes.
So who am I? I'm that guy, one of those guys that's trying to do that. I mean, I think the rest is just details.
Yeah. Well, for those of us who are a little curious and want to know the details, you were in the Army. And you were a psychiatrist, and you're now living in Coos Bay, Oregon. Is that where you're originally from? How did you come up, Rick?
Well, I'm from Portland. I'm from a working class family. My dad started his own business and supported us, a family of 7 kids. My brother served in Vietnam. That's what first made me aware of how crazy war was. But I thought I was naive enough to think that America had learned its lesson after the debacle in Vietnam and that they wouldn't let the government do that again. That's a measure of how naive I was when I joined the military myself in 1988 to get my psychiatric training paid for. Fortunately, I was not in there that long. I was disabled. I was Section 8, you might say, because of psychiatric problems I had myself during my first year of training. I was only in 18 months. But I am a veteran. I signed my life away like everybody else. I would have been in Iraq had that not happened. And I realized that I still have a big debt to pay. So I got involved in the anti-war movement during the first Gulf War.
Yes.
And that's where I first came up with the idea for Soldiers for Peace. I called it Soldiers for Peace at the time. It was really just kind of a vague concept, honestly. Here I was, I'd never been involved in the anti-war movement before. People were really upset at the time as I was, and I had no idea how to connect with these people. I didn't have any connections in the movement, even in Portland where I lived at the time, let alone anywhere else. But I started traveling around the country and getting involved. I was actually in a residency program in Albany, New York at the time, I should say. But I just, I kind of freaked out when this war broke out. I just couldn't believe it. It blew me away so bad that I literally became manic and started traveling around the country. And in my feverish brain, one of the things that I realized early on was that, geez, everybody wants war to end, right? I mean, almost everybody except the war profiteers. So why in the hell is it still going on? What we really need to do is convince people that because we all want to end war, that all we have to do is stand up and say so and convince the people around us how important it is to stop it now. Because the idea that we could still have war in 1990, when it was obviously not necessary. We were so much more powerful than any opposing force. I mean, the Berlin Wall had already fallen. Who was our enemy? It made no sense. It was obviously about resources, and I thought people would understand that. That was my one crazy thought that really tripped me up. I thought I was actually convincing people. So it was really nothing but kind of a neat idea, Soldiers for Peace, the idea that everybody who wants to see the end of war is a soldier for peace, and all we got to do is figure out a way that we can have some kind of unified message, like war is not inevitable. Because really the reason that I concluded that we still have war is one way of looking at the basic reason is that people think it's inevitable, so they don't speak up. That's what I realized was the problem, and I thought if I spoke loudly enough and convinced other people that we could start sort of a wave of consciousness. So if I could convince two people to convince two people, then it becomes an exponential process. I grossly overestimated how much people care, or how much they're capable of believing something as outrageous as the idea that it's possible to end war. And since then, let me just keep it short. I've done a lot of thinking about why that is, about why people are so hard to reach and what it will take to reach them. And so, in the last several years, I sort of reactivated Soldiers for Peace as Soldiers for Peace International in 2009. Gave it a website, which made it real, right? And literally there were 25 veterans, all combat veterans like me, who literally agreed to call ourselves Soldiers for Peace. So when I talked about it, I wasn't just talking about a concept, I was talking about something real. There wasn't a whole lot to it, but it was real, so I didn't feel like I was misleading anybody. But really in my mind, what it was, and I still think it is, what I always thought it was, is everybody on the planet who's willing to speak out for justice and work for justice. And that means there's millions of us. And I'm still working to try to figure out how to realize that collective power that we have.
And you mentioned on the website, soldiersforpeaceinternational.org, that it's a virtual army.
Uh-huh.
And I was wondering if you could explain what you mean by that. Just the fact that it's through the internet, or is there more to that?
There is a lot of ways to look at it. When I came up with that phrase, virtual army, I guess what I really mostly meant was what I just now said, which is that there are potentially, I said millions, there are potentially hundreds of millions of us. It's a question of waking people up, because I believe, and other people might disagree with me, but I believe that people are basically good until they get twisted in such a way that they that they either give in to their animal natures, you could say, or they somehow convince themselves that they're doing the right thing when they give in to their animal natures.
Yes.
I think, though, that most people do have a better side, and we need to appeal to that. And that's something I don't see much of in the anti-war movement, I'll have to say. Of course, there are lots of good examples of people appealing to people's better natures, but mostly what you see is people angry and people being against this and against that instead of pro-peace. There's a big difference between anti-war and pro-peace in my mind, even though I still use both terms, and I don't mean to criticize anybody who looks at it a different way. That's another problem, is we need to learn tolerance for different ways of looking at things. And we need to sit down and have these conversations when we disagree. Like you and I, Phil, we've talked many times about the value of impeaching President Obama, or I should say calling for his impeachment, because I think we both agree it isn't going to happen. I certainly agree that he's committed impeachable offenses. Obviously, Bush did too. But I would go a long ways back before I find a president that didn't commit impeachable. So, in my view, that is not that important. For one thing, to actually work on it, because for one thing, everybody that would do the impeaching is complicit. Everybody in Congress is complicit who hasn't spoken up against these illegal wars, and that includes everybody that I'm aware of. Well, no, excuse me, there are a couple exceptions. Rand Paul has spoken up against some of these. Some of the other Republicans have, and some of the Democrats in the House have, although the Senate has almost uniformly backed all of these aggressive actions, including Bernie Sanders and other well-known liberals.
Let me interject here, if I may.
Sure.
This is Larry Pinckney speaking. First of all, I want to also mention that there have been indeed other people. I do certainly concur with you that in essence the Congress is complicit. There's no doubt about that. Obviously, they're all lapdogs drinking from the same despicable trough. Okay, but let's also remember Cynthia McKinney. Let's remember that Cynthia was kicked out of the Democratic Party because she dared to question the war crimes and the atrocities of this government. So, and there are others who were not necessarily in Congress, but the Honorable Cynthia McKinney was in Congress, and so I think we need about 1 billion more Cynthias, and as Phil can tell you, we interviewed Cynthia. Cynthia was on We Cannot Be Silent. I believe it was in July.
Yes.
Yes, right. My point is simply this: that notwithstanding the complicity, Rick, that there's enough complicity to go around. But I think that there's a need for us to go beyond that and to say, look, there's something called redemption. Now, if there's anybody interested, and I believe there are, in redeeming themselves, and by redeeming themselves, all I mean is redeeming their own humanity, all right? Just like John Brown did when John Brown, as an abolitionist, stood up against slavery. He was not just doing this for blacks. He was doing it to redeem his own humanity. So, in that context, I think that there's a need, quite frankly, for us to understand that in one sense or another, we're all complicit. All of us. Even those of us, including myself, who have fought against. I've been fighting for over 45 years, and I hope I will be able to continue to fight if I live. But the point is that all of us have an obligation and a responsibility. And we need to recognize that obligation and to carry out that responsibility. And I applaud you, Rick, for what, you have done and what your compadres have done, with Soldiers for Peace. I mean, I'm reminded of the song, The Universal Soldier, and it's been sung by many people. My favorite version of the song, or rendition of the song, happens to be by Buffy St. Marie, the native indigenous woman who sings The Universal Soldier. But many people have. But all of us need to understand that we have a responsibility in this struggle. It's a collective struggle. I was very pleased to hear you say, you made reference to how we have to be, I'm paraphrasing your words, obviously, but we have to be accountable. We have to understand that all of us are affected globally. This is not just a U.S. issue, even though, as Dr. King pointed out, and Brother Malcolm pointed out, the U.S. is the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. But it's not just violence against the rest of the world. It's violence against black, white, brown, red, and yellow people right here in the United States and beyond, throughout Mother Earth. So I just wanted to applaud you and thank you, for what you said. We've got a lot of work to do. Nobody ever said it was going to be easy. Nobody said it was easy. And if they did, they're in La La Land. It's not going to be easy.
That's true, Larry. I agree with everything you just said, including about Cynthia. And yes, if I wasn't clear, I was making I was differentiating between the House and the Senate. There are a number of people in the House who have taken various stands against various aspects of our militarization, of our empire building, and Cynthia is probably one of the best examples I can think of. But my Congressman Peter DeFazio, he's also highly skeptical of a lot of the crap that we hear, and it's maybe it's because people in the House are a little closer to the people, but I can't think of anybody in the Senate who's consistently against these imperialist maneuverings. Although, as I mentioned, Rand Paul, being a libertarian, sometimes does call out some of the more obvious things like, I guess, it wasn't him, it was Ted Cruz who said, why are we Al-Qaeda's Air Force? I love that line. Out of the mouths of babes.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to add on to what Larry was just saying about our responsibility beginning with ourselves, and I didn't plan on this going off onto the impeachment thing, but that is the topic of our many discussions over the years, Rick, and it's what brought Larry and I together, actually, and I'd like to forget the Congress, forget the Senate, forget this the so-called representatives that you've pointed out well are beholden to the corporations that profit on war. You know, that's why we keep having wars. They're beholden to them, and I really believe it's not jumping ahead and saying, well, is it going to happen? Will it happen? So if impeachment does happen, who's the next in line? You can't go there until we first do our responsibility, which is to call for it. And that's all I've been advocating for. And I know Larry, when he wrote that piece back in July of 2011, was of the same message right there. We got to start with ourselves. But I also wanted to get back to you, if I could, on the first Gulf War that got you up in arms. Here we are.
Before we do that, Phil, let me just respond to what you just said.
Sure.
Again, I think it's really important when we have these disagreements that we're clear on what our positions are. I support anybody who wants to call for impeachment because, as I said, I do think that President Obama has committed impeachable offenses too. Now, I have my own reasons for not doing that or working on that. One of those reasons is we all have to choose what we work on. Yes. And one of the things I personally try to encourage people to do, and by the way, I do not speak for Soldiers for Peace International. We are an anarchical organization, a leaderless organization where everybody chooses how best to accomplish our mission of ending war through promoting justice. So you are a soldier for peace, even though you and I disagree on how valuable it is to spend time calling for impeachment.
Right.
But I do not oppose you doing that. I understand why you're doing that, and I know there are good reasons to do it. I prefer not to spend our time discussing that today, but I do want to acknowledge that I know there are good reasons for doing that. It's just that, in my opinion, if we are thinking strategically, I would advise a different way, and we'll get into that probably later in the show, what I would advise.
And I understand, Rick. Thanks for saying that. And,
you bet.
And you can only do so much, you know. Pick your cause, pick your fight, and do what you can. Yep. and if enough people are coming at the gate in different spots of the gate, and we all keep working at it, sooner or later we'll knock that gate down. But you mentioned earlier about the first Gulf War, how when that started up, and that's about 15 years in the wake of Vietnam, how the heck can we be doing this again, especially when the so-called evil empire, the Soviet threat that was dissipated. It should have been a peace dividend and a time of peace, but instead, one of the things I noticed, and Larry writes about this and speaks about this quite a bit, is the change in the media. The same war profiteers that own the people's representatives in Congress also bought up the media. They learned a lot in that 15 years from Vietnam, and and they really used that media. You were talking about how could people not see this? How could people go along with it? And I've been learning that myself. My God, how could people go along with this crap? It's because of this programming of that. Larry calls it the corporate stream media, and you've got things like the nurse, the babies in the incubators on the floor. It turned out to be a totally fabricated story. That it wasn't a Kuwaiti nurse. It was actually someone in the Washington circles, a daughter of an ambassador that was coached by Hill and Knowlton, the high-priced public relations firm, and they flat out lied, and they got the war with this corporate stream media that Larry refers to, and the power of it, and I believe that really is something. And you talk about, we spoke earlier on the telephone as far as how much time and effort do we put into going over and over again this negative thing, and how much time do we put into an alternative that can counter it. And that's been the challenge for me. I know that with my anti-war activism. And Larry's been at this many, many more years than I. But Larry, you've written quite a bit and you've spoken quite a bit on this issue of the corporate stream media and how it does mislead so many of our fellows. Do you have anything to add on that?
Well, I would simply say, excuse me, I would simply say that we need to understand that without a propaganda arm, imperialism and fascism cannot sustain itself. It cannot survive. So they must have a propaganda arm. And and you're absolutely correct, Phil, when you pointed out that they learned from Vietnam, from the atrocities and the reaction or response, if you will, to the atrocities in Vietnam. Okay? And so they decided this time that they would take over the quote-unquote media. And that's precisely what they've done. Except the difference is today we have our own quote-unquote alternative media. We have the internet. We have many, many, many different outlets on that internet. And that's what we need to utilize. Not only that, we also have some small print media out there. All right. And to try to address what you just said, the reality is that, yes, we all have to pick and choose. We all have to decide where can we be most effective. That does not necessarily mean that where we can be most effective is where everybody else can be most effective. People can be effective on different levels depending on who they are. I always say each one reach one, each one teach one. And you know, let's plant the seeds. Let's plant the seeds. I believe when it comes, for example, to impeachment is a process it's a political process of trying to teach people. I don't give a damn whether this war criminal, blood-sucking Barack Obama and his Democrat and Republican minions, I don't give a damn whether he's impeached or not in practical terms. But let's impeach him in the court of the public, in the people's court. You understand? Because that's really what it's all about. It's not about, and so some people might say, well, the best way is we need to do such and such a thing. Let's look at environmental issues. Let's look at how Obama and his minions, both Democrats and Republicans, are, for example, supporting Monsanto. Okay? Or other people might say, well, let's look at, how they are in reality supporting the big corporations while at the same time claiming that they oppose them. Okay? Other people, we could come up with all kinds of things that people may choose to focus on. And that's fine. That's good. As long as we understand, as Brother Malcolm X said, that we're coming out of the closet, euphemistically speaking, as a united force. So I see I don't even see an argument. I don't even see a contradiction, and I don't even see, I don't even see differences. I just see people deciding where they can best be effective. Like Rick is making decisions as to where he feels he can be best effective or most effective. I say all power to the people. Right on. Do it. Other people are making those same decisions, and they may choose other areas, but the point is that we are all standing up, and we're coming out of the euphemistic closet, all right, as a collective force. So I'm extremely pleased. I know as a black American, one of the big issues is police brutality and the militarization of the police. All right? But this doesn't just affect black Americans. It really affects everyone in this country. And if you look at it throughout from a context of Mother Earth, it affects the whole globe. Look at look at Fallujah. Think about Fallujah and the atrocities that, this government, I will not say our government because it's not our government. That's another thing, Rick, that you said that I'm so glad you said. You see, because this is not just it's not just imperialism. It's 21st century fascism. That's all it is. Let's be honest. So I was glad to hear you use those two words. So anyway, Phil, that's my response.
Yes, and it sounds like this is pretty neat because this is where we are coming from in our respective activism. But go ahead, Rick. You were going to respond to what Larry had to say.
Well, he made quite a few points there, and I'm not sure where I was thinking about jumping in. I took a whole bunch of notes, actually, while he was talking. I guess to get back to the point about why I keep coming back to this, impeachment is not something I spend time on, even though I appreciate it. I totally agree with everything Larry said. All those things are important. People are going to come into this in any way they want. What's important is educating them that they need to do something and trying to get them involved, because that's really the hardest part. As I said, I found out when I first tried to start Soldiers for Peace in 1990, just getting people to even understand that they have to do something is incredibly difficult. And I guess I was kind of flabbergasted when I got involved in this again in 2009. I'll be honest with you. Here's the thing. I continued to be naive despite the fact I was completely blown away by the fact they had this first Gulf War. And I think part of the problem was because I had a manic episode as a part of my response to that I was dealing with that instead of trying to figure out what went wrong with what I was trying to do. I figured out, oh my God, what happened to me? I went way too far. I challenged too many of my own preconceptions, and I just got crazy, right? And I didn't want to think about it beyond that because it was scary. But the truth is I wasn't really crazy for the most part. It just kind of drove me crazy that it was like I was living in an alternative reality all along, but I never admitted it to anybody. And because I was pretending to think about these things like everybody else did, that when I was forced to confront it, that all of the contradictions just came at me at once. And I tried to become the person I really am. And it was too hard to do all at once. Does that even make sense, what I just said? Because
I can understand it happening.
It's kind of important what I'm getting at, because when I restarted this thing, I kind of went through the whole process again, only I didn't go crazy this time. But I did get hypomanic. I mean, I became incredibly energized and didn't need quite as much sleep as usual, but I stayed organized, and I actually got very, very involved in a lot of things. Again, I traveled around the country. I spent hundreds of thousands of dollars meeting people, trying to get some of these ideas out there to the right people, instead of doing it randomly this time and anybody on the street trying to chat them up or people I knew personally. I was going out and I was meeting the movers and the shakers and trying to pitch, one or two of these ideas instead of the whole thing to each of them. And I was still impressed with the lack of receptivity. And I think part of that is because they're leaders. And I'm not going to name names because they're all doing great work. But I don't think more than a couple of them had any appreciation for what I was doing coming out of nowhere. I mean, who am I, right? I don't have a following. And frankly, I don't care if I ever get one, as long as my ideas get out there. And so one of the ideas I was pitching, as you said in the introduction, from the beginning was make a constitutional amendment a campaign issue. So I pushed and pushed and pushed. I got the backing of two different parties in the 2000 U.S. Senate election. Neither one of whom, I don't think anybody in either one of those parties appreciated the significance of what I was trying to talk about. and why I was running and why I quit my job as a VA psychiatrist, and gave up a nice salary to do this. I don't think they realized it. So I also reached out to people who are leaders in the movement, the amendment movement, and I couldn't get them to understand it either. I've written about this in several different blogs and Soldiers for Peace International. I wrote one most recently sort of really laying out the individual groups involved and what I thought was going on. And I don't think it's personal. I think it was a difference in strategy, particularly with Move to Amend, who, by the way, has now adopted that strategy. 4 years down the line, 4 years when global climate change has been progressing, when these wars have gotten completely out of control. Yes. So that's my criticism, is that I still think they should have done it earlier. They were afraid people would misunderstand. I think they were afraid people would misunderstand and they would get a weak amendment. I think they have the same idea I do, is that amendment is inevitable. Just like single payer is inevitable. It's historically inevitable. The question is, what are we going to get for a constitutional amendment? I think they rightly feared that we'd get a weak amendment if we hadn't educated people. Well, it's 4 years later, and I don't think we've educated very many more people about the difference between what the Democrats are willing to pass and what we really need. I think had we been pushing this 4 years ago, they wouldn't have had a vote on an amendment like they did this year. But we would have had a much better discussion about it, and it would have still taken this long to get them to actually pass one. But we might have passed one, and it would be stronger. So that was my argument all along. I'm concerned that because we waited this long, the trigger point for the end of the human civilization, I shouldn't say the end of the world, but maybe the end of not just human civilization, but the human species, that could really happen because of global climate change. I mean, people don't want to talk about the worst case scenario. The scientists, even Bill McKibben and those guys, they don't want to scare people off. The fact of the matter is that the trigger point could be tomorrow. We don't know. If a giant methane bubble came up from the Arctic floor or from the tundra of Alaska that's melting, if it happened all at once, some scientists have done the calculations. It could raise the temperature 1.7 degrees rather suddenly. Now it would persist for 40 years because that's how long methane persists in the atmosphere. And I don't have to tell you, I don't think 1.7 degrees centigrade above the temperature rise we've already witnessed, what that would do to human civilization. And if you look at the spin-off effects, it isn't just a matter of flooding in low-lying areas. What happens to all the refugees that go to the center of those poor countries? Are we going to start sending them food? Is there going to be mass rioting? Are we going to be sending troops over there? Of course we are. All of that and more. And not only that, but it won't just be poor countries. Miami will be underwater in 30 years if we don't somehow miraculously reverse this. These are facts. To anybody who looks at what the scientists are saying and looks at the data. We should have been doing something 10, 20 years ago, and it's not just a question of mitigating, it's a question of whether or not we can save human civilization. That's how serious this is. And that's why I was kind of upset that I couldn't convince anybody to use this strategy. I mean, I understand there are people who don't think it's as important as I do to get a constitutional amendment passed. I think it's an essential first step to getting democracy. And without democracy, we're not going to tell our government to quit having these wars, and they aren't going to listen. Because right now, well, my point is just that's where my desperation was coming from more recently was, people got to wake up. If we can't organize somehow the constitutional amendment, other ways of addressing corruption, calling for impeachment is one way to point out corruption. So it's not that it's irrelevant. It's a question where you want to put most of your energy in. But until we do, we're standing on a knife's edge. Human civilization itself is at risk, even the survival of the human species.
And Rick, just to be clear for our listeners, and maybe even myself, and perhaps Larry too, this constitutional amendment that you were talking about was to abolish corporate personhood, and you're talking about a constitutional amendment federal constitutional amendment, correct?
Yes, and it's
Running
a little
for
more
the
complicated.
U.S.
Yeah, when I first ran in 2010, I had read Tom Hartman's book on equal protection, and he convinced me that all we needed to do was change the wording of the Constitution or add a little section, a new amendment that established that corporations are not people. And I've learned since then from talking to other experts and doing other reading, it's not that simple. Corporate personhood is actually a separate issue from the idea that money is speech, which is why Move to Amend splits those two issues up. They're related. They come together in Citizens United. But if you abolish corporate personhood, you would not reverse Citizens United, because that was not the basis of the decision. I don't want to get into the details, but let me just say the idea that corporations have constitutional rights, you could argue, yes, they have free speech rights, but that was not the basis of Citizens United. They were granted the privilege of buying politicians by spending as much money as they wanted, as long as they didn't give it directly to the politicians. They were granted that privilege because the Supreme Court said free speech is a right that exists independently of who's speaking. That's insane, but we have a fascist Supreme Court, and their agenda is fascist. So we have to both establish that money is not speech and shall be regulated, and specifically, corporate money should be banned, as it was under the Tillman Act of I think it was 1905 until Bellotti versus a court case where they said no, money's speech, and corporations can spend money to influence at that time ballot measures and now political campaigns after Citizens United. So not only can they spend it, but they can spend unlimited amounts. That's the real significance. We need to do both, though.
Yes. And the bottom line is, and this is something that Larry and I have been pointing out more generally, is, the follow the money, the powers that, money owns our government, but there's a heck of a lot more of us as people. We're talking about power, and what we need to it's basically who influences our representative government. Well, the money's been influencing it. Those few at the top have been influencing it, but there's 330 million people in this country, or somewhere around that number, and there is a heck of a lot more of us than them. And you mentioned earlier about we could put an end to war if people could get past the idea that it is inevitable, and it's the same. I believe the same way with realizing first our own power and then actualizing it. And Larry has had experience with this firsthand with when the original Black Panther Party started up, that they started to do for themselves, and they realized how much power that they could pose, and what a threat that was to the powers that be. And Larry, you relate that story about when the J. Edgar Hoover, when those files were released in regards to the Black Panther Party. Could you share that with Rick and our audience?
Well, I'll try. One of the things that I found most interesting about the COINTELPRO files, but specifically being more specific about what J. Edgar Hoover had to say about, for example, the original Black Panther Party. And I'm very glad, Phil, you keep saying original, because I want the audience to understand we are not talking about the so-called new Black Panther Party. That has virtually nothing to do other than the name that they expropriated from the party. It has nothing to do with the original Black Panther Party formed in 1966 in Oakland, California. Anyway, getting what you said, J. Edgar Hoover made it crystal clear, crystal clear, that what upset the FBI and the U.S. government as a whole, which, by the way, is the same thing today, what upset them was not the desire of the Black Panther Party to defend poor people and poor communities against police brutality. What upset them was the fact that the Black Panther Party had actually involved the community, black, white, brown, red, and yellow, beginning in the black communities, of course, that's where we were founded, okay, with programs such as the free food program, the breakfast program for children. And that's when J. Edgar Hoover came out talking all this madness about the Black Panther Party being the greatest single threat to the national security of the United States, which, when you think about it, when you have people doing for self, people who begin to understand that we are the modus, the modus and the modus, okay, of change, Lord, then the powers that be, okay, corporate government, and I mean just what I said, corporate government, become extremely concerned and will do anything to try and, quote, as the FBI would say, to try and, quote, neutralize. And what do they mean by neutralize? They mean discredit, they mean frame, they mean imprison and or murder. And that can be found in the U.S. congressional records. That's what neutralize means. So that should tell us, all of us, I don't give a damn what our colors are, all right? That should tell all of us, black, white, brown, red, and yellow, that that's precisely what we need to be doing. Mm-hmm. Because that's the Achilles heel of this fascist corporate state. We need to stop all this jive-ass paradigm of Democrats and Republicans. Democrats and Republicans are two sides of the exact same coin, all right? And we need to understand that and go beyond that and say, you know what? We don't need that coin. We can come up with our own coin, all right? So anyway, I don't know if I really answered you, Phil.
I think you've illustrated it perfectly. That these are examples of people being a threat. You know, the fact that we really are a threat to the powers that be, meaning that we could actually reclaim our government to represent us. And anytime, you take the oh my God, we're coming up on the top of the hour, but anytime you take something like the Black Panther Party and their school lunch program doing for themselves, or those poor folks down at Waco, they were doing for themselves. Anytime any segment of the population is doing for themselves, and getting along on their own power, almost immediately the government sees that as a threat, demonizes that threat, and then neutralizes it. But JP, is there anyone currently in the queue?
Not at the moment, but well, I think Larry's pretty fired up. I think you should take him off, take that muzzle off, and let him out the what's that word? The podium. Get him on the podium. Go on, poke him with.
Well, I think you're right. If we don't have any callers or anybody in the queue, we should go right back to what Larry and Rick were discussing there. So I'm going to shut up and let you guys get back to it.
So let me just reframe it, since our listeners didn't hear what I brought up.
Yes, please.
Talk about. Okay.
Good
Actually,
point.
Yeah, there are 2 points that I was thinking about as Larry was talking last time. Malcolm X said that power concedes nothing without a demand, but he also said something to the effect that you can't really give people something to do until you've changed their political consciousness to the point that they can recognize. What's that?
Well,
okay.
Well, let me
I'm sorry. That may be my computer in the background. I'm sorry. I thought everybody was hearing that. No, it's just the voices in my head again.
Okay. Just
sorry.
Try to hang in there for another 50 minutes, please.
Yeah, I apologize. So, but you have to change the political consciousness first, so that people can understand A, that something needs to be changed, and B, that they're capable of visualizing what that change is. Because if it challenges something that they take for granted, like this crazy idea that America's a democracy, then they're not going to know what you're talking about. So, and this was not new when Malcolm said that. The same point was made during the populist movement, which was, first it was trying to get people to understand how the banksters ran the country at that time, and then B, what they could do about it if they would get together, and they had a great organizing model. But that's just another example. Now, there he was talking about how the Black Panthers organized and why that was such a threat to the FBI and the powers that be. Larry, you want to repeat that for our listeners, listeners?
Let me quickly interject that actually what Malcolm had said when he was talking about consciousness, had originally come from none other than Frederick Douglass, the abolitionist, who had made the point that, power concedes nothing without struggle, that we have to struggle. Things don't happen by osmosis. Sorry, folks. Actually, I'm not. Manna does not drop from heaven. That's not the way it works, okay? Let's be honest. Let's be real. Let's be human. And let's get on and change things, okay? But it was Frederick Douglass that, and Malcolm often referred to Brother Frederick Douglass, among many, many others, who made that point, and Malcolm picked up on it and expanded on it. But in any event, I think what I was trying to get across is that we, black, white, brown, red, yellow folk, we are Mother Earth's children. We're the children of Mother Earth. Our job is to nurture her, take care of her, and in so doing, take care of ourselves. But, we have to understand that things are, look, how can I put it? Things will occur when we make them occur. I think the first law of physics, if I remember correctly, says that two things cannot exist in the same space at the same time. In other words, when there's a push, there's going to be a pull, and vice versa. So I think, and get me back on track here, Rick. Get me back on track. Make sure I'm dealing with where we're supposed to be going with that. But I think that we have to understand that we are the ones ultimately, and what do I mean by we? Everyday, ordinary, black, white, brown, red, yellow people. You can put the color any order you want. I don't really care, all right? But everyday people, we are the ones that have to exercise the power and to raise the consciousness. And we have to begin at where people are. We don't go up talking to people about, we got to begin at where they are. Respect where they are, begin at where they are, and in enlightening time, they will move quickly. But we must respect them at where they are.
And that's been a learning process. With the activism, and Rick, you mentioned you getting involved originally when the first Gulf War was starting, and you did things as you knew how to do then, and then when you got back involved with Soldiers for Peace years later with the second Gulf War, you mentioned that you had learned a few things from the first time around, and that and one of the things that I've hopefully been learning is just exactly what Larry was saying about meeting people where they are. And also, in order to be heard, you have to be able to listen. And you've shared that with me, Rick, a number of times over the phone and other communications, and it's been helpful. But when we were talking, Larry, at the break, we were talking about connecting the dots for people, and, and your tagline in all your pieces is each one teach one, each one reach one, and there is a responsibility on our part to walk these folks through it. We can't just tell them, expect them to get it and move on, and then get mad when they don't get it. There is more to it.
You're right. We didn't get it. None of us got it right away. Come on. And we need to remember that. I know many times, I need to remind myself of that. Having been involved in this struggle for over 45 years, sometimes I go, damn, can't they see it? Well, the answer is no. All right? The answer is quite simply no. Not unless I do my job, meet them at where they are to help them to see it. Go, Rick, you want to say something?
Yeah, it's so funny. I'm really so glad you brought that up, because when I was thinking about what I wanted to say on this show, that was one of the things that I thought of. And the way I look at it is, it seems like I just had this huge argument with these people on Facebook who are anti-Zionists. I got tagged by somebody who wanted me to comment. So I'm reading these comments, and these people are such obvious, I guess I should call them Jew haters, because every time you say anti-Semite, I go, there's no such thing. I don't want to get involved in these stupid peripheral arguments. The point is, you really do have to be clear that you're talking about Zionism and not Jewish people in general. These people are trying to say all Jews think this. If they don't think that, then they'll stop being Jews. They'll disown their religion, because anybody who believes in the Jewish religion is a fascist or whatever. They believe they're exclusionists. They are supremacists. People say the same thing around Muslims. And these people, there's no comparison. Come on, folks. The problem is these people, they know so much, they think they know everything, and they won't listen. And not only that, but they have no idea of the effect of what they're saying on other people. They are so busy arguing details that they forget that our job is to convince people who don't even know what the hell we're talking about. So keep it simple, stupid. But the truth is that they really were racist. And it's funny because I had just written an article called Zionism and Racism. I encourage people to read on Soldiers for Peace International. If you want to have a rational discussion on anything, not just that issue, you have to start out by assuming that both sides probably have something valid, even if one of them is totally distorted. They probably have something valid. If you want to have a discussion, you look for that first, and you come to that agreement, and then you say, okay, but now given that, and you go from there. You don't go jumping off on, you don't challenge their assumptions, their basic assumptions, say they're full of shit, and then go from there and expect them to follow. They won't do it. They'll never, ever do it. And so if you go to somebody who's wearing a I love Democrats button, and you say, oh, but the Democrats are just completely sold out tools, they're fascists, they're corporatists, it's all true, but that's not how you explain it to them. You could say, but the system is so corrupt that even a great guy like, I don't know, Max Baucus, the poor guy, has had to give in to, he feels like he has to give in to this corrupt system. Don't you see that you have to hold them to a higher standard? But you have to have an alternative, and that's why I always say, ask your wonderful Democratic senator if they'll support a constitutional amendment that would really reform campaign finance, like ban corporate campaign money. If I have that discussion, I do that. And here's the thing. I use Facebook a fair amount, and one of the things that I do is I'll take something that's challenging to the Democratic mindset, and I'll post it all over the Democratic Facebook sites. It isn't obnoxious. I'm not trying to tick them off. I'm trying to make them think. I won't say Obama's policies suck. I'll say, geez, look what we're doing in Syria. Does this make sense? I don't understand. And I might even say, gosh, I wonder who's pressuring President Obama to do that. But but to make them think, not to put them on the defensive. If you're not aware of when you're putting people on the defensive, you're worse than useless. You're a detriment to the movement, because as Larry said earlier, we all have to be involved in this movement. We have to tolerate the ignorance of some of the people that we're trying to get involved. And I mean, when we get Tea Party supporters standing side by side with people who are in Occupy encampments for weeks at a time, then we'll have a movement. And you know what? We came pretty damn close then, because we had a lot of libertarians out there along with anarchists and communists.
That's right. That's what we called in the original Black Panther Party, power to the people. You dig? And
I remember the term.
Right. And Phil and I actually did have a couple of people from your state. I believe you're in Oregon, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Occupy, Phil, you should mention that. Both Occupy and Tea Party together.
That's right. And this was short, and it was I'm glad you brought that up, Larry. And the thing is, and I wanted to, even before you brought that up, Larry, I was thinking that we have to give the people an example, and we have to be that example. It has to start with us, as far as working together. But the National Defense Authorization Act of 2012, which was signed on, what was it, New Year's Eve, Larry, of 2011?
Yeah, December 31st, yeah.
Yeah, on the way back to Hawaii on a Saturday night, which basically gave us the indefinite detention provision, which, gave the president the ability to just basically detain any American citizen, torture, or even murder them. And that was outrageous. That affects us all. And we're still hung up on the people. We're still hung up on this left-right thing, and loyalty to team, to party, to ideology, that we do the neutralizing for them, Larry.
Exactly.
With our own left-right divide, Exactly.
That's right. That's what the corporate media promotes. That's the divide and conquer strategy. Is the oldest strategy in the book. When Cain slew Abel, I swear to God, somebody was there standing, going, "Oh, hey man, go with Abel. Or what are you going to do about that to defend Abel?" And other guys would go, "No, Cain was totally right, man, totally right." And they formed tribes, and ever since then, we've been having wars, right? Because they stopped identifying as members of the same clan or the same family. And that's what we have to promote. That's the kind of political consciousness we have to promote. The people, capitalized.
And these, your fellow Oregonians, is that how you would say it, Rick?
Yes, yes, it is.
Yes. And where were they, Larry? In Eugene or somewhere like that out there?
All I remember is Oregon.
Yes, and what had happened, Rick, and this is very important. They got together in a demonstration, and this is just a few months after the Occupy. This is early 2012, and they physically got together on the same corner, side by side, to protest specifically this NDAA and the indefinite detention provision.
We've done the same thing in Coos Bay.
Yes, but I wanted to let you know.
Okay, go ahead. I was just going to say, Panda and the local Tea Party group got together with some of the leading liberals in the community, and we all testified in favor of a resolution at the county level that would basically say that NDAA won't be enforced in Coos County.
Yes, and Panda's been doing a great job at that. People Against the NDAA, pandaunite.org. But here's what happened back in 2012, and this is going back to whenever there's a threat, it's squashed, it's neutralized. These folks did get together, and what happened there was they realized that they could work together on a single issue, and just leave everything else that they know they're going to disagree on aside. And they actually realize their power and actualize their power, and it led to them having more conferences, and I think some or more community actions together, and they started their own local access TV programming as far as continuing to work together on common issues and demonstrating that they could do this. And I'll tell you what, man, you heard very little, if any, about these two groups doing that on both on the left or the right sides, because you know the controllers of the so-called left, you know, and I'm talking alternative media here. Very few people heard about these folks, and if they heard about them, they didn't hear about them for long.
Well, you just hit on something really important, and if you'll let me riff here for a while, there's been a whole lot of things come up here I'd like to comment on. First of all, this importance of getting left and right together and healing this artificial divide. I've been writing about this since early 2009, this was what caused me to start Soldiers for Peace International again. I was working very hard to try to raise awareness about single-payer universal health care back when Obama first announced that he was going to work on health care reform. Well, I didn't assume he meant it, so I got involved because I thought people should know what that really meant. And I was shocked. My Congressman DeFazio, is one of the most liberal congressmen in Washington. He wouldn't talk to us about it because it was, verboten in the whole discussion, which was actually about a bailout for the insurance industry. I realized that from very early on, that that's what it was really about. That's why we got shut out of the corporate media. The whole thing was orchestrated. So I started writing blogs for Democracy for America, who, by the way, supported the public option plan over single payer before anybody was even willing to talk about single payer in Washington. Really pissed me off. So they had this contest where, the best bloggers would get free trips to their Netroots Nation thing. And the second blog I wrote was, or the first blog I wrote was, why doesn't Democracy for America, Democracy for America is not for democracy in America, something like that. Anyway, why they shouldn't support the public option, and I just pointed out right then it's a boondoggle, it's a bailout. The second one I wrote was called "Will the Tea Party Save the Republic?" Because I realized if we could convince those people who were so confused that they thought we were becoming a socialist country, if we could convince them that, yeah, we agree, government's too big, it's corrupt, we agree on all that stuff, let's have a discussion about what to do about it. And my idea at the time was this constitutional amendment. So I wrote about that as early 2009. It's not a new idea. I have a radio show too, Taking Back America, and I had a guest on she was the founder of the Minnesota Tea Party Patriots, and I had her on the show, and I titled the show Occupy the Tea Party. And I've been pushing this idea ever since, and the neat thing is she had kind of already thought of this in her own way, wasn't like verbalizing it that way, but it was just a natural click when I met her. And then now you guys are doing the same thing. Of course, we call this synchronicity. What I want to point out, though, is if you have in mind that kind of an agenda, you can be a part of what I call it planned synchronicity. What we're doing is we're planting seeds all the time about these ideas, these essential ideas that have to change America's political consciousness to prepare them for what they have to do, for the changes that we have to demand and create ourselves. I call it planned synchronicity because I know that if I succeed at convincing two people that this is important enough to convince two more people about, then it becomes exponential. And all of a sudden everybody's thinking the same thing. And that's what synchronicity is. It's a question of understanding that at the beginning and not giving up because people aren't listening. That was That's what I could have done after 1990, when I literally went nuts trying to convince people some very basic truths. But I didn't give up. I decided to work harder at trying to figure out how to convince them, and to figure out what the essence of the message was. And that's part of it, is that they have to do that. Part of it is making them understand that they have to question everything they hear in the media, including the so-called alternative media, because as you point out, they're worthless. And we have to reach out, though. We have to use the alternative media. Eventually, these ideas that are rising supposedly spontaneously in synchronicity all over the country are going to start appearing on their shows. So, you mentioned earlier, Phil, how I encourage people to look for positive things. Okay, yes. I'm running around planting these seeds since 1990, but mostly since 2009, and I'm looking for them to sprout in places. And I'm not assuming that Tom Hartman suddenly starts talking about something I've been talking about for 10 years because I said it first. It doesn't matter, because I know there's somewhere out there, there's a Phil Restino and a Larry Pinckney who may be saying the same thing. Maybe not you guys, but maybe somebody else. Eventually it penetrates the consciousness, but we have to be focused. We have to have a strategy. So you were talking about one issue that liberals and conservatives can agree on, NDAA. Awesome issue. Here's some more. Abolish the Fed, or at least audit it, start by auditing, whatever. The Fed is a problem. The banks are a problem. The banksters are ripping us off. End the bailouts. Let me just list a few more. Everybody's against NSA spying. Let's get together on that one. Hey, guess what? Most people actually don't like war. You see how this fits into this? Even if you can't appeal to their altruism and compassion, you can point out that 55% of our discretionary budget is going to war, and we don't have anybody powerful enough to hurt us. That don't make sense. You want smaller government? You want a more efficient government? We need to slash the military budget and slash the intelligence budget, and we need to virtually eliminate domestic spying, because it doesn't help anybody but the government that the Tea Party folks don't trust anyway.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So and more fundamentally, all of these issues are only issues because of the corruption in our government. And that's why I always come back to the need to reform campaign finance in particular, which is one of the goals of this constitutional amendment I'm pushing. So, and there is, by the way, there is a movement. There's a national movement to pass this constitutional amendment. So when people are choosing what they want to work on, one of the things they should consider is what's most likely to have success and what is most likely to have an immediate impact. And a lot of people, tens of thousands of people around the country, have decided campaign finance reform or abolition of corporate personhood. Take your pick what you think is most important. We'll lump them into one amendment. We're all working for it. We're organizing locally around the country. Find a group in your area. If there isn't one, start one. Go to movetoamend.org. I didn't used to recommend them because I have a lot of problems with them, but they are coming around now to understand that they need to be broader in their approach. They need to include other approaches, including, most importantly, this pledge to amend strategy I talked about. Make this a campaign issue. Make candidates' jobs depend on it. And when we reach out, when these local groups are reaching out to build their groups, because this is all about grassroots organizing. How do you organize a movement? Pick a central issue, because people get confused when you have 10,000 issues. And then, but we do want to support people working on whatever they want to. So you go to people in the environmental movement and you say, hey, are you tired of beating your head against the wall? Do you really think these corrupt puppets in Washington are ever going to give you what you want? No. Can you give us a little time to help us pass this amendment? You do the same thing with people in the peace movement. You do the same thing with people in the civil rights movement. You do the same thing with people in the anti-government spying / whatever conspiracy movements. the 9/11 movement, the people that think we're victims of a socialist takeover, whoever, point out to all of them that none of this stuff would be happening if it wasn't for corruption in government. We need to stop fighting each other, and we need to identify an enemy. The enemy is the banksters and the puppets in Washington whose interests they serve. That's simple.
Do what you just did. Connect the dots for folks is what we were talking about during the break. And boy, here we are 35 minutes into the second hour. But we do have a couple of callers in the queue, guys. If you don't mind, I'd like to bring on, I guess there's someone from the 765 area code. Caller?
No, that was a test call. It's area code 864 who's current.
Oh, pardon me. We have a caller from the 864 area code. Thank you, JP. Are you there, caller?
Yeah, this is Tim Gatto.
Hi, Tim.
Hi, how you doing? I've been reading Larry for a long time.
Uh-oh.
And what I just want to say is, I'm in 100% agreement. I mean, you're preaching to the choir here. But and with Larry Pinckney, I appreciate everything he's done, and you're right. The Black Panthers, they had a movement, and the Occupy had a movement, and right now, okay, and this is what I'm trying to say, and this is what I just wrote about yesterday. That was in Counter Currents and Op-Ed News and a whole bunch of other places, is that right now our backs are up against the wall. I mean, right now Obama is challenging Russia and China, and so is NATO, and so is the EU puppets, and all the people of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE. I mean, all these Islamic fundamentalistic states that funded ISIS, and ISIS is nothing but what we funded that moved into Iraq, and all the Sunni people in Anbar province that we bombed with depleted uranium and everything else, welcome them with open arms. So ISIS didn't take over Iraq. Iraq gravitated towards ISIS. These are things that people don't understand. But the whole deal is a geopolitical alignment here. Right now, we are threatening Russia. And Putin just told Obama that you can't threaten a nuclear power. You don't know what you're doing. Right now, our government is crazy. I mean, people in the government, they're sociopaths. And they're going to get us killed. And we don't have time to plant seeds and everything else. We really need to do what Chris Hedges said, mass civil disobedience. And the way you do that is to get people to come out in the streets and lay down on the streets and just do what they did in Hong Kong and do what they did in the Occupy movement and get people that to understand that they're going to end the world. And they don't care because of hubris. And that's all there is to it. I mean, Obama will get his kids killed just to show that he's the biggest shit on the planet. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you're right. We don't have time to make movements. And I propose getting together with the Tea Party, and I know about the left and right divide, and so does everybody else. But what we need to do is pick a time and pick a place and just do it. And what I'm saying is go down to Washington, D.C., everybody should pick a time and a date and have everybody who thinks the same way we do, and that's most of the country, believe it or not. Even here in South Carolina, that's supposed to be a red state, hates the Democrats and the Republicans. They hate both of them. They hate the government. They're afraid of the government. Yep. And we need to pick a date
to this, guys.
But if you would, I just wanted to, Tim or Rick, I wanted to address what Tim brought up about the urgency and the seriousness of all this, and bring in an experience that Larry had in prison, And I think that really illustrates what Tim is saying. That man, we're really playing with fire here. You know, we're close. We could have World War III, nuclear war. But going back to there's a YouTube out there that we have. It's on blackactivistwg.org. And it's a 17-minute YouTube entitled Larry Pinckney, A Prison Experience. And what was happening was, this was when Larry was in one of the California state prisons, and there was just a killing back and forth, the whites and the blacks, and all at the pleasure of the prison administrators. They just sat back and enjoyed it, and while the prisoners killed each other. And what had happened was we had to stop the killing, was where Larry was at, you know, and an opportunity presented itself where an Aryan Brotherhood leader was being set up, and he came to Larry to help with his defense in Warden's Court. All right, now you're talking about a Black Panther and an Aryan brother. All right, but the common problem was they were killing each other. And they had to stop, and that was the urgency of it all. So Larry defended this fella, agreed to defend the fella, and of course a lot of the blacks were saying, "What the hell you doing, man?" And the same thing with the Aryan brothers. "What the hell you doing, working together with that guy?" And these two guys, the two of them, went ahead with it, and Larry was able to successfully defend this fellow in Warden's Court, and what the end result was, they were able to stop the killing for a period of time. Now the point that Larry and I do talk about this does not mean they had to become friends, or they had to give up their prejudices, or they had to give up their hatred for each other. No, and I think that's what keeps us from working together is people think, if I work together with this fella, I have to give up my beliefs, my hatreds, my prejudice. No, you put that aside. And so Larry and this fella were an example, and the killing stopped. And it was an example that others could see and follow. I know I spoke for you, Larry, but I think as far as what Tim is bringing up here, that we've got to be an example. And I think before we can even get to Washington D.C., Tim, we've got to be an example locally. You know, but that's
we don't have. Yeah, we don't have time.
No, but that's my point. You have to do something.
We have 20
Go ahead.
minutes left. Can I speak?
Yeah, Rick.
Okay. Yeah, Tim brought up a whole bunch of ideas, and I'm glad he did, because they sort of just show that he either didn't hear or didn't accept what I said before. So I'm going to reiterate a couple of points that I made. But first, I want to say, Tim started out saying, "Hey, you're preaching to the choir." Well, yeah, that's what most of us are doing, and that's the problem. So I want to reiterate that, in addition, education is important. I'll just flatly say I think Tim's absolutely right. We don't all think the same way. Obviously, most people don't think that if they're a member of the Aryan Brotherhood that they can reach out to a Black Panther for help. We don't think the same way. So we do have to change people's consciousness in some fundamental ways. That doesn't mean it's not either or, Tim. You know, it's not civil disobedience or changing. Just a second, it's my turn. I didn't interrupt you once.
Whoa,
let me finish.
Let me interject, Rick.
Let me finish.
Well, I will.
Okay.
I will.
Okay.
But
sure.
Let me be the moderator here, and let. I just want to give Tim, our caller, a chance to say what he was going to say, and then pass it back over to you. Okay,
sure.
Rick?
Okay.
Go ahead, Tim.
I'm not saying that he's wrong on anything. He's right. And if we had 50 years, yeah, it'd be great. And what he said, the last part of what he said about the NDAA, about war, about the NSA, about the banksters taking everybody's money, and 55% of our discretionary budget goes towards the military. And he might have said, too, that the bottom 80% only holds 7% of this country's wealth are things that click with the American people. And this is what we need to tell everybody, and this is what we need to make them act on. It doesn't matter if you're left, right, black, white, red, it doesn't matter. These are things that everybody's concerned about. These are things we need to harp on because we don't have much time. They're going to start World War III pretty soon. And we need to do just what he said, but we need to reach a mass audience with it. And we need to pick a time and a date where disenfranchised people can go down and just protest and lay in the streets and mass civil disobedience, just like Chris Chedji said. It's the only way it's going to happen.
Well, thanks, Tim. And I know you wanted to respond, Rick.
Right. So to reach out to those people, we have to remember that not everybody thinks the same way, and we're not always preaching to the choir. So once we figure out how we're going to message this so that people, it'll resonate with people, and that depends on the audience. Like, I'm really glad Tim gave the example of disenfranchised people, because you're not going to get a mass movement until you get these people who've given up to realize that their only power is collective power, and things like civil disobedience. I totally agree. Don't think for a moment that I don't understand the urgency of the situation. Like I said, human civilization is at stake. And I've been desperately trying to get people to understand that we need to focus somehow. I think we need to focus on corruption. People can disagree and work on whatever they want. But in the long run, to fix what's going on, we need to deal with the corruption. One tool for that is civil disobedience, and because of the urgency, I certainly support that. What I'm trying to point out when I say it's not either or is, Tim, whether you meant to or not, you did say we can't do this. And what I'm saying is we have to do it all. There's no reason that people can't be planting seeds at the same time they're planting educational seeds, at the same time they're planting civil disobedience. In fact, they're impossible to separate, because the main purpose of civil disobedience is to educate people about the problem, people who won't pay attention otherwise. It isn't going to force the government to change, but it will wake people up. That's the value of civil disobedience. So I just want to point out, again, one of the principles of Soldiers for Peace International is that we support any efforts that people are taking, nonviolent efforts, to work for justice. And so it goes without saying that I support civil disobedience. It goes without saying also that I support other people who are using different approaches. My main focus is trying to get people not just to understand that corruption is the issue, but that we need to work on a constitutional amendment. Because if we don't, ultimately at some point, we may stop World War III, but that doesn't fix the problem. I mean, the Vietnam War ended eventually. It didn't fix the problem. It didn't fix the problem of fascism when the Nazis were defeated because they took over this country, or people with the same mentality took over this country. We need to go to the root problems. We need to keep that in mind. Whatever you think you need to do tomorrow is great, as long as, you keep your eyes on the prize. It's not the end of the game. If you get yourself arrested, you're in jail. Hopefully somebody notices, but it isn't going to force a change. It's only going to wake people up.
Thanks, Rick. I know Larry had. Go ahead, Larry.
I'd like to. First of all, Tim, are you still there?
Yeah.
Okay. I want to first of all thank you very, very much for calling, and I'm very, very glad that you read my writings. Thank you, my brother. I appreciate it. Let me just say this. I think, and I can't speak for Tim. I can only speak from my perspective. But I think that we're really, first of all, not even in disagreement. None of us are. The fact is I think that Tim is talking about something that I am deeply concerned about as well, and that is the urgency of the situation. We are dealing with nuclear powers. Thermonuclear powers they have the power just between Russia and the United States itself, not including other nuclear powers such as China and India, etc. All right, not even and Israel, by the way, is also a nuclear power, but not even all right. But not even including them, between Russia and the United States alone, they have the power to knock, in a matter of minutes, to knock this planet of Mother Earth off of its axis. All the human species can be eliminated within 20 minutes. And I hear where Tim's coming from, and I feel it, and I'm deeply concerned about it. I also hear where you're coming from, Rick, and I feel it, and I'm deeply concerned about it. I think that we need to mesh, that is to say, MESH, to bring that together. I think Tim is saying, damn, I'm with you, but I just want to make sure we're still alive to be able to do what you want to do, right? And
exactly.
All right, and I think that's why I say there's no disagreement at all, quite frankly. Even though, quite frankly, I think it's good to disagree sometimes. But in this case, I don't even see any disagreement. You know, so I guess that's all I can say. That's my little what do they call it when I was growing up? You know, that's my bit from the cookie jar. You know, but
Yep.
My penny's worth. All right, but that's all I have to say. And again, I want to thank you, Tim, not only for calling in, but I'm deeply appreciative that you do read my writing. Thank you so much, my brother.
You're welcome, Marion. Thanks for being there for us.
Yeah.
And Tim, I want to thank you for contributing to this contribution contributing to this conversation also. And I think this is such a great illustration of how people feel passionately about what they're saying, and they talk past each other sometimes. I heard you when you said you agree with me, and I agree with you too. But the reason that I was maybe a little vehement in my response was it's important how we say things, because people do have that tendency to take something literally that you say. And instead of saying, well, do you mean this? They'll assume they know what you mean. So I just encourage people to think about how they put things. When you say literally, we don't have time to do that, like don't do it is what most people are going to hear. That's what I heard. Then I think that's where I need to step up and say, wait a minute, we can do both. And when I did say that, you agreed. So it's a question of keeping that open mind and having that conversation and asking questions instead of assuming you know what the other person means. And I didn't ask a question. I assumed that, so I'm guilty.
Okay.
One last call.
Let me do this. How do we get a constitutional amendment banning money in Congress or anything else when Congress is not working for us, it's working for all the people who have money? How are you going to get anything done?
Let me do that real quick because we got a caller I know. I'm just going to give the short version.
We have another caller. Go ahead.
The short version is you make it a campaign issue, and that's what we're doing now, organizing around the country to do that. If you go to the Move to Amend website and look under Pledge to Amend, you'll see what the strategy is. It's something I've been pushing since 2010, and believe me, it's, again, just like any war, it's a question of getting people to understand it's possible and then doing it.
We're alive. When we're alive at the next campaign, there's going to be an issue. Then we'll do it. Okay.
It will be, and it should have been this one. You're right, Tim.
Okay.
Tim, thank you so much, Tim.
Thank you, Tim.
We got one more caller before we sign off air tonight, so you certainly gave us a lot to think about, and the main thing is that we do need to connect the dots for our fellows and try to walk them through it, and maybe wake them up to the urgency of things, hopefully. We're going to say goodbye to Tim. Thank you. Our next caller is from area code 313. Caller, are you with us?
I am. Can you hear me?
You sound very distant.
Am I any closer now? Does that help?
Yeah, that's a little better. Thank you.
Hello, guys. It's Paul. Hi, Bill, and hello, Larry.
Oh, yes. Hi, Paul. Welcome back to the program. And we're on with Dr. Rick Staggenborg of Soldiers for Peace International.
Hello, Doctor. How are you?
Great, Paul.
I want to lend my expertise. I'm more of a technician at heart, and by trade, and I see, like, in just listening to what's going on in this conversation here. I see that everybody's hooked up and they're all wanting to do it, but they're out of rhythm. Electrically, it's kind of wrong. It's like our resistance. We got a wheel off balance, and everybody's heading to the same place, and it's it's just I got to tend to agree with Larry because it sounds mature, and when he says you got to look inside. We are all to blame, and we don't want to be blame throwers. We have to look inside, and I think electrically right now the world's on fire electrically, and that's the urgency we're seeing. I think we need to get together and understand the art of resistance and realize that what we're up against is impeding us, and there's a bunch of electrical properties there. I really think it's as above, so below. And I see togetherness and brotherness, and I see that we all see this big elephant in the room, and a talk like this brings it out, and it lets us know, hey, wait a minute, we are heading in the right direction. We've got to do this. I don't want to die. That's not the way I want to go. I got to say something now, and everybody can do something. Nobody knows what to do. But I suggest that they should just pick one good thing and put it on the list of what not to do. And that's my message. I look at it technically and I go, okay, the thing's got a wobble to it. What are we going to do about it? I've been at it a long time. I've been resisting since pre-1980, and I've been privy to all of it. And to hear a radio talk like this it's great. It's people are. I'm glad you brought that. When I first started streaming it years ago, people looked at me like I had 15 heads. And now I can call up anonymously and talk to some smart people that feel the same way I do. That's progress.
Paul, I think you bring up a really good item, and I agree with you totally that it underscores really the pattern of this conversation, which is that
which is going to come to an end in
that's
3 minutes.
Why I jumped in.
Thanks.
Yes, I think we are all in basic agreement on a whole lot of things, and it's a question in my mind of I'll just repeat what I said to Tim. Instead of jumping on somebody when you think you disagree with them, remember that you're in a conversation. You don't have all the answers. They probably don't have all the answers. Hear them out. Ask questions. Don't jump on them. And always remember, it's not either or. We got to do all this stuff. We got to honor whatever anybody's doing, even if we think it's ineffectual. We can have a discussion about why some other use of their time might be more valuable, but we have to honor the fact that they're out there trying, because unfortunately we are still very much a minority, but we're a growing minority. And if we can reach two people and convince them, this is the important part, convince them to go out and reach two more people instead of just preaching to the choir, go for somebody beyond the low-hanging fruit, then we can make this an exponentially growing movement, and that's what we need.
Yeah. Well, that's great, Rick, and we're really down to about a minute or so to the end of the program. This has gone too quickly. You were going to say something, JP?
30 seconds. Go ahead.
30 seconds. Okay. Rick, website, soldiersforpeaceinternational.org.
Right, and there's a link to my radio show, Taking Back America, there too. All our podcasts are on it.
Oh, fantastic. I want to thank you so much for joining us this month, and we're looking forward to hearing it on the archive and the YouTube later. And Larry, blackactivistwg.org, and a big thank you to our caller Paul, and everyone else who is listening tonight, and JP of wolfspiritradio.com. Please go to the website, hit the donate button. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you next month on the radio. Thank you.
I cannot be silent.
Nobody can do everything, but everybody can do something. Everyone must play a part. Everyone's got to go to work. Work for peace. Spirit said work.
I cannot be silent.